welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops.
And Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. Make sure you are listening to him and Blake Silverman over on the Pin Down on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel. Make sure you're reading all of Detroit Bad Boys work, listening to Locked On Pistons, Order of the Blazing Horse, all of the great Pistons talk, all of the great Pistons content creators out there do a tremendous job covering the team along with a bunch of radio stations. O2, I know you were on one this morning. I get the opportunity every once in a while. So again, just continue to take all of that stuff in and support all of the great content creators out there, as well as, of course, reading all of O2's work by being subscribed to the Detroit Free Press. And for free, you can subscribe to the Motor City Hoops Substack, where I have game notes, analysis, video breakdowns, all of that. O2, before we get started, I do want to show off this right here.
Yeah.
One of my students, shout out to them. They were working on an art project that was similar to that. It was, I think, their favorite song. And I said, hey, that is really cool. What are the chances you could do that for my podcast? And they said, hey, if you just take a screenshot of it and send it to me, I'll paint it. And so obviously, I'm not going to drop names or anything here, but shout out to that student. Very, very much appreciated for that. I got to figure out if I'm going to put it on the wall somewhere or keep it in my classroom or whatever. But I know you had a very positive reaction. I was telling the student, I said, hey, I sent the picture to my co-host and he was like, yo, that is really, really cool.
It's the most beautiful work of art I've seen in a very long time. Shout out to your student. Greatly appreciate it. Definitely got to display it somewhere prominently.
Yes, I will figure it out. O2, we have often started this podcast with the mile high view, and lots of times it's been positive. A week ago, I don't know that I asked that question because I don't know where it would have went. What is the mile high view of this Detroit Pistons organization right now?
They're in the second round. I mean, the mile high view is, they've gotten to the point of success, the marker of success that I think you needed to hit to say this thing is still moving forward, right? Winning 60 games obviously is a massive indicator that you're doing a lot of things well. But to go out in the first round like that after what you did to New York last year, I think would have been a disappointment. So they were on the brink, really on the brink of collapse. I mean, you're down 24 with 11 minutes to go, come back and win instant classic game, then to put it off in game 7. I mean, they did it. And when you do it, then you can just move forward, right? It doesn't matter how you did it. What's important is that you got out of the first round. Now you've got this marquee matchup against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and you're one step closer to accomplishing that goal of winning a championship. So they should be feeling pretty good. The road maybe was more difficult than expected, but they prevailed. And, I think that's the reason to feel good going into round 2.
Okay, I have 3 things before we kind of talk through this series, specifically game 7, maybe 6 and 7 together, and then a look ahead to the Cavaliers. 1, I do think that they probably lose this series if Franz Wagner stays healthy. Down 3-1, if he's healthy for all 3 of those games, I'm not sure they pull out that victory. With that said, O2, here's something I've really been thinking about in terms of the 1, 8 seed, all of that, whatever stuff, and it taking them 7 games. And I ultimately don't care. They figured it out. They got it done. They had a crazy comeback. Like, I think they're going to be better for it, to be honest with you. But with that said, O2, why were the Orlando Magic an 8 seed coming into the playoffs? What was it about their regular season that made them an 8 seed? What was the biggest hindrance to them not meeting their preseason expectations?
Yeah, not having Franz Wagner by far.
So what were the Pistons against the actual 8-seeded Orlando Magic in this series when they did have an injury? As Chuck Brewer said, injuries were what caused them to be the 8 seed. What was the Pistons' record against the Orlando Magic when they were actually an 8 seed in this series, missing some player or players?
4-3. Maybe you misphrased. Okay, hold on. Say that again. I don't know if I heard correctly.
Essentially what I'm saying is, what was their record when Franz Wagner was out?
Oh, yeah, 3-0.
3-0. So my point was, I got a round way to get to the point of they were 3-0 against the actual 8-seeded Orlando Magic, right? Like the team that quote unquote earned the 8 seed in Orlando because they were injured all year. Whenever Detroit played that team, they were 3-0 against them. When Orlando was healthy, everybody thought Orlando was better than Detroit. Going back to the preseason, this is an Orlando team that's made their all-in move with Desmond Bane and has a bunch of salary. So that leads me to my final 2 things. I actually think I said 3, but it's going to be 4. They're kind of the same. I think Detroit is playing with house money right now. I want them to win. I'm excited for this next series and the data collection and all of that. Ultimately, they made it farther than what they did last year. And here's the other thing, O2. They still have not cashed in all their chips yet, right? They have all of their first round picks. Detroit could be a salary cap team this summer if they wanted to be. I'm not saying they will, but if they wanted to be. So I don't understand any sort of negative whatever stuff about what just happened or what's going to happen moving forward. Obviously, would it be disappointing if things don't go great against the Cavaliers? Sure. But I think that was a huge victory. And again, I think that they're going to come out better on the other side of this, having to go 7 and come from behind victories and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, that was an absolute war. Like, that's just the epitome of a slugfest, grinded out, team pushing you to your limit and then having to overcome type of series. I think a lot of guys said that after the game, JB, Cade, Asar, Tobias, that type of series can make you better. And I agree to an extent that they're playing with house money because, no matter what, this Pistons team has accomplished more than any team since 2008, right? This needle's moving forward. I think you got so much data out of this season that tells you this team is exactly where it needs to be. And, there's debate whether you still need a big swing, this or that, but you're pretty close to where you want to be. With that said, obviously, I think maybe for the fan base, maybe even, not from the front office, but from players, especially, you don't approach it that way. They were the number one team in the East. And, I think whenever you're number one, you want to prove that all the way through, right? So we'll see how they look against Cleveland. But yeah, bare minimum, anything that happens from here won't change the fact that they didn't move forward this season.
They surpassed most people's preseason expectations, I guess is my point. And they didn't make the all-in move. They are, house money now that they are the first round. So that's what I want to be clear. If they would have lost in 5 to the Magic, this is not the tone that I would have or the conversation I would be having. I remember going back to the preseason, and I think Wes was on that with us talking about what do they need to do next year? What is quote unquote not stalling out? And it was getting past the first round. You just have to get past the first round, and that's progress forward. And again, the reason I'm very much okay with that is they didn't make a big trade deadline move or a big swing in the offseason or anything like that. They have all of their versatility, all of their option open to them. Now, to your point, O2, they are still the 1 seed, and with that does come expectations, and the team should hold themselves to the expectation. In-house, they should be going, this isn't enough. We survived that. We learned from that. We should go into this series with Cleveland expecting to win, wanting to win, and being disappointed if we don't win. All I'm saying is from an outside big picture perspective, I don't think even if they get swept in this series, you can look back and say, oh, what a disappointment. To me, that would be moving the goalpost. That's my only point now that they have gone ahead and won that first round series.
Yeah. Like I said, that needle's moved forward, and I think you had to at least win a playoff series to feel good about what you accomplished this season. And then there's also some poetry with it too, to do what the 03 Pistons did the year before they won the championship, overcoming a 3-1 series deficit against an 8-seed Orlando Magic team as the 1 seed. And you can look at the timeline of this team, and maybe they're ahead of schedule in some ways. Nobody had them winning 60 games this year, but clearly they're building something that could be sustainable. And I think that's what we learned from round 1 as well. With their backs against the wall, Asar Thompson played terrific basketball. Cade Cunningham played terrific basketball. Jalen Duren got better as the series went on, and he was awesome in Game 7. Completely outplayed Wendell Carter Jr. That's all stuff that carries over regardless. You have to play your best basketball because your margin for error was 0, and those guys stepped up, and that's exactly what you needed to see from your top young players.
Okay, guys, and everybody here, appreciate all of the comments, and I'm starring them the best I can as we go through. Wes isn't with us today. He was busy this afternoon. We will get to those as we kind of talk through things. I know there's a lot of Ron Holland conversation. We will definitely get to that. But I want to touch on something you just said, O2, and there was a comment about that. Yeah, Chuck Brewer says, besides the Stu question, which we will come back to as well, the best part leading into the second series is that Jenkins and Duren seem to be waking up. I think that's what I'm most excited about as a analyst, someone that covers this this team and breaks it down and analyzes it is we had a pretty rough Jalen Duren series for the most part. Now, he had a very good game 7. I thought his overall rim protection in the series was good, even though the offense wasn't. Danis Jenkins probably had his best game in game 7. I am excited to now really get to evaluate those guys in the playoffs, O2, because now there isn't the excuse of, well, it was just their first time, right? They just went through a series and battled through it. And now you get a different matchup for them to attack with probably different rotations and all of that. So not only do I agree that it looks like some of those guys found their footing, I'm excited to see what those guys can bring now that they did get through that first round and then get an opportunity to play in the Eastern Conference semifinals.
Yeah. And also, I think you got to give a shout out to JB, who signed a contract extension today. The team announced, but his gamut's paid out in the end. He continued to trust Danis Jenkins. It paid off with him submitting 16 points. I think he knocked down 4 threes. Continued to stick with Jalen Duren. He had his best game. Somebody brought up Stu. You probably didn't expect Stu to only play 8 minutes in both of those final 2 games, but P. Reed, he gave them exactly what they needed in game 6. A lot of those gambles paid out for him in the end. And again, it was a bit more of a winding road to solve that series, but it extends down the roster. Tobias, Danis, like somebody else said, like those guys absolutely delivered when they needed it in game 7.
Yeah, so O2 was so lucky to witness history live in arena during game 6. That was a crazy game. Any reporting you can do on JB's contract extension? I know they put the press release out. Like, this just happened in the last hour or 2. You may not have much yet. And I also don't want to bury a story that you may have coming out. So we don't have to get into it if you would rather us wait.
I don't have a whole lot to add. It just obviously speaks to the job he's done so far. 30-win improvement his first season, and then to go from 44 to 60. They've only exceeded expectations since he's come in. And, I think it explains itself. He's just got this team to the second round. I mean, how many coaches have the Pistons had in between Flip Saunders and JB, that could even win the playoff game, let alone get to the second round. So it makes sense. I think the timing makes sense coming off of that game 7. And obviously, he's going to be somebody who gets a lot of Coach of the Year votes, too. I think that all kind of fits.
MC313 says, no, we miss when known as Dad. Yes, he holds it down for us. Elijah did ask, who do you think will win Coach of the Year? I would have voted for JB Bickerstaff. I think JB Bickerstaff should win. I actually do think he will win. I think the odds changed at the end, but O2, again, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but you don't have a vote this year. If you did, I don't know if you're comfortable sharing who you would have voted for, or maybe just who you think will win.
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty close between JB and Joe Mazzulla. I don't know. I honestly don't know who's going to get it between those 2, but I'm almost positive they will be the top 2 vote getters. Mazzulla had a lot of support for Coach of the Year, obviously, just from the people I've talked to. I know we've had Fred Katz, and he mentioned that he voted for Mazzulla, or would have voted for Mazzulla if he had a vote. I actually can't remember if Fred had a vote or not. But yeah, Mazzulla had a great season as well. Nobody had Boston winning, I think, 56 games. But JB didn't get it last year. I mean, you're talking a team that had in total a 46-win improvement over 2 seasons. I mean, which is just unfathomable. If I had a vote, I would have voted for JB, just because I don't know how you lead that big of a turnaround and not win Coach of the Year. But with that said, we'll have to see how it shakes out. I think he and Mazzulla will be pretty close to 1A and 1B, however it shakes out.
O2, it's May 4th. This team has a pick in the first round this year, and we don't have any time to talk about it. And it probably won't for at least another week or 2, if not longer. Times have changed where we were like, hey, we can't talk about draft yet. We can't talk about draft yet. We have to wait to talk about the draft. So, all right, let's talk about some of the players. Who do you want to start with? Cade Cunningham, obviously an incredible series. I know who the guy, I've tweeted about this, who I think I was maybe most impressed with, maybe most surprised, maybe I thought played the most above what I thought their role was going to be in this series. Obviously, Asar defensively. I think it should be Cade, Tobias Harris, or Asar. We can talk about their game 7 performance in the series overall. Any one of those 3 guys that you want to start with?
Let's talk about Tobias, because I know in our next segment, we'll get a little bit more into the next series, and I think Asar and Cade will factor heavily into that conversation. And I wrote about Tobias actually last night for today, so it kind of fits that. But Tobias had a legacy series, just to put it plainly. 30 points in an elimination game 7. Just hit so many big shots down the stretch with 5 of 7 from 3. Averaged more than 20 points per game in the series. Just absolutely that next scorer they needed after Cade Cunningham. I mean, he fully occupied that role. You look at his numbers. I mean, he had 20 plus in the last 5 games of the series. Tobias is still writing his Pistons legacy. Between his first stint and now, he's been with this franchise for 4 years. He's made the playoffs 3 out of those 4 years, and he just delivered one of his best postseason runs in a series where they absolutely needed him to. So we've talked a lot about just his impact on his team and the veteran leadership and all that, but he also did it on the court this past series, and that game 7 is going to go down as one of his best games.
It was a really big-time performance from Tobias Harris. I'm glad you brought up the big-time shots. I did a breakdown today over on the Substack. Go check that out if you haven't already. It truly was just, I just went and clicked on all of his made shots throughout the series and kind of wanted to see if there were any trends I could figure out. There was a lot of late shot clock buckets, and there were a lot of buckets where it was like momentum swing buckets for him. So, I mean, it was a big time series for him. And obviously down the stretch, can't remember the exact number. I think it was like 45 or 46% from 3 in games 5, 6, and 7. But for the series overall, just under 22 points. The efficiency numbers weren't great. They truly weren't 0-2. But he also got to the free throw line 5.5 times a game, which is the most in his career in a playoffs. He averaged 8 rebounds. I think his defensive rebounding, he led the Pistons in defensive rebounds per game by 1.5. He had 7 defensive rebounds per game. Jalen Duren was at 5.4. So just an all-around performance. And I realized Paolo Banchero was really good in this series, but Tobias had to guard him a lot of this series. And so it was a lot of energy for him to have to take that matchup. And again, I realized that Paolo was really, really good, but that was energy Asar didn't have to expend or whoever, right? So I could not say enough about how Tobias played in this series. And as you mentioned, there's a history here. There's the playoff Tobias stuff, whatever. If you would have told me he was going to have to be the number 2 option in the series, I would have called you crazy, and I would have assumed they probably lost the series. So the fact that he was able to step up into that role for them was massive.
Yeah, and then he also broke the game wide open with 11 straight points toward the end of that second. It was tied at 45. Then he hit a 3-pointer. He had a tough and one. He had that tough double clutch mid-range jumper over Jalen Suggs. Super tough shot making. And then once he got it going in that stretch, it ended up being like a 31-8 Pistons run when it was all said and done. And the game was pretty much over. Yeah. I mean, if he doesn't do that, I think it's a different game, because Paolo came out so hot that night, or I guess that day, given that it was a 3:30 game, and ended up being a blowout. But it's probably back and forth a bit longer if Tobias doesn't strike right there.
We had a shout out here from Daryl Gulp, says New Zealand Pistons contingent checking in. The roller coaster of emotions from game 6. Can't imagine the collective roller coaster in the arena. Yeah, it was absolutely crazy. All right, let's go to break. 0-2. When we come back, we can start talking about Cade and Asar, etc., with a little bit of a look ahead as well to what this is going to look like starting on Tuesday night against the Cleveland Cavaliers.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we're just going to go ahead and talk about Cade, who had his first legacy series, right? Series on the line, down 3-1. Over his next 3 games, he averages, what was it? It was like 36.3 points, 6.7 assists, 5 rebounds, 1.7 steals, and a block, shooting 51.6% overall and 61.1% from 3. That's like an MVP type, we're only going home when I say we go home type of performance. That 45-point performance in game 5 on their home floor at the LCA, that battle with Paolo going back and forth, I mean, that's a classic. Game 6 and then game 7, obviously, what he had I think 32 and 12, somewhere along those lines. Yeah, I mean, just some all-time stuff from him. Absolutely. I don't know where he finishes in the MVP race or the first team or whatever, but I think a performance like that shows why he absolutely is in that conversation.
All right, we got people checking in from all over. So Klingmaker says, not to be outdone, I'm here in the United Kingdom checking in. And then Detroit Indy says, so cool to see Pistons fans worldwide, myself representing Ukraine. Incredible. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you all for, and I know we have our guy or girl Salih from Bosnia checking in as well, that they had a question about Ron Holland that we'll get to later, but as well from Bosnia. Oh, look at this. Laz Jackson in the house. Cade was unguardable by great defenders. Magic had to offer. Also, shout out to Laz. Just the absolute GOAT right there as well. Omari, 32.5 points on 46, 40, 84. We talked about Cade. What were two of the things? Oh, yeah. Steven Suggs from Queens, New York. Shout out, Queens. The two things we talked about with Cade was 3-point shooting and getting to the free throw line, right? 40% from three on 7.5 attempts per game. And he got to the free throw line over 10 times per game. That is superstar level stuff. It truly is. He still ended up averaging over 7 assists per game. I know the turnovers were bad. I get it. I think that was the biggest critique you can give is probably that, because his defensive impact, I think, was good at time. And then here's the biggest thing to me, and I brought this up, is 40 minutes per game. 0-2. This guy had a collapsed lung less than 2 months ago. What are we doing? Just an incredible performance from Cade Cunningham. Just incredible. He was so good.
Yeah, that's just elite stuff to average that over the course of a series. It doesn't even matter that he'd averaged 6 turnovers, but he's giving you 32, 7, 6, 46% overall, 40% from three on high volume, and then the free throw volume as well. He did it on both ends. He had chase down and clutch blocks. Yeah, truly a two-way star. Everything you want to see in a franchise leader, a number one pick. And I think that's one thing the Pistons could say going into this series against James Harden and Donovan Mitchell and all these stars is that you could debate which team has the better overall top four, but the Pistons have the best overall player, and that's Cade.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is, I mean, I'm interested to see who they put on Cade in this series. And this is where we can start to transition to this a little bit. And then we'll come back to other players and talk about them and then transition into the series as well. But Cade was not good against Cleveland in the regular season. He averaged less than 20 per game. His shooting splits were not good. He did average 8 assists and 7 rebounds. Now, I looked at some of the individual box scores, and I think he had 2 just really bad shooting games that really kind of, I don't want to say they were outliers, but really kind of swing it negative. And one of those was, the 4th or 5th game of the year or something like that. I don't want to put too much stock into it, but when you look solely at the Cavaliers roster, I don't know that you immediately think that they have somebody like Franz Wagner to guard him. Now, Max Strus, is going to take that on. Deed Wayne's going to take that on. Cavalier fans may disagree. Maybe they think those guys are just as good as a Franz or whoever. They do have real good rim protection. The other thing is they have defenders that theoretically Detroit might be able to try to attack and get switched onto Cade and then let him go after them. Even somebody like Dennis Schroeder, who, I won't speak ill will of. I thought he had a great run with Detroit last year, but he's just too small for Cade Cunningham. So it will be interesting to see what kind of series Cade has and what Cleveland can throw at him. The other aspect of that, and I guess, again, this is where we can really transition into it, is who does Cade guard in this series? Omari, because I think that is, if I had worries, quote unquote, about the second round matchup with Toronto, it was the defense and them forcing turnovers. For Cleveland, it was the backcourt of Donovan Mitchell and James Harden, and Cade probably having to match up with one of those two guys, at least at the start of games.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting series for Cade. For the reasons you mentioned, he did have some difficulty against Cleveland because it feels like they're just an awkwardly built team a bit because they've got the bigs and then they've got all these smaller guards, like you said, Schroeder, Donovan Mitchell, obviously, but they do have some wings in the middle who could match up with Cade at least to an extent physically.
They do. Maybe I haven't given them enough credit. That's a good point.
Like Tyson, Wade, Strus, those guys are 6'6", 6'7", 6'8". Like well-built, they're not guys that Cade could just bully as easily. And then on the defensive end, do you want to put them on James Harden, who's just going to try to foul them out? Do you put them on, Donovan Mitchell and trust that there's not a speed mismatch there. It's interesting, right? I also think you probably don't hide him on, Tyson or on Tyson or someone else. Maybe you could even risk it with Mobley. Does Mobley have the physicality to, bully Cade? I'm not sure if he does. So they'll probably have to be a little creative there. Also, not to get too far off topic, but that's also a reason why it seems like Ron Holland may work his way back to the rotation this series, because Asar obviously is going to take one of Donovan Mitchell and James Harden. You're going to need an elite point of the attack defender on the floor, for 48 minutes in this series. And after Asar, Ron's probably your next best guy and can save Cade for some of that as well. But they're going to have to figure some stuff out on both ends to unlock Cade's full potential.
I do want to, we're definitely going to talk about Ron Holland. I want to get to Cade and then Asar, and then we can go to Ron. We definitely need to talk about the center rotation as well. And that's where we'll get to JD's, Game 7 performance. The thing with Cade is, the Mobley one is actually interesting, too. The issue then is, who does Tobias guard? Because if you put Tobias on, Dean Wade, well, now here's the issue is Duncan Robinson. You only have one option for Duncan Robinson, and that's whoever the fifth starter is, whether it's Dean Wade or Max Strus or Jalen, whoever the Cavs start there essentially is who Duncan Robinson has to guard, because you can't put him on one of the two in Harden or Mitchell, and he's too small to guard either of the two bigs. That's why then it just comes down to the other stuff, right? And so if Cade on Mobley, again, is kind of interesting, but then that's Harris on James Harden, or, you're not putting him on Donovan Mitchell. I don't know that, even as Harden has maybe slowed down a little bit, I don't know that Harris has the foot speed to stay up with that. I think I'm going to roll with what Laz said, where I think you put Asar on Donovan Mitchell and you put Cade on Harden and you live with it and you tell him you do not reach. Now, my worry is Cade is very physical and handsy at the point of attack. I actually think he gets a pretty good whistle in regards to that. So that is a worry for me. Let's talk about Asar Thompson now, because we talked about the offensive rebounds, the steals, the blocks, all of that, but I don't care what the offense was. He did end up averaging 12 points per game. That was regular season against the Cavs. He ended up averaging 8.5 points in the series, 8.7 rebounds, 3 assists, almost 5 stocks per game. Asar ended up having a good series. We saw JB really trust him, play him a ton of minutes. This is a massive series for Asar Thompson, especially on the defensive end.
Yeah, 100%. When you've got, and the Pistons have never faced this iteration of the Cavs with both Donovan Mitchell and James Harden.
That's a great point.
I want to throw that out there. James arrived at the deadline, obviously, and then Donovan missed that one game that they had after the deadline against Cleveland on March 3rd. Yeah, I mean, Asar is going to be instrumental, to not just limiting whoever his primary assignment is, and I also would guess that they'll put him on Donovan Mitchell, but they're just really going to have to rely on that chaos he generates as well. They're going to have to really capitalize on any transition opportunities they get. They're going to have to really try to neutralize the rebounding battle as much as possible, because Cleveland actually was better in the offensive glass than Detroit was in the regular season. I think Detroit was like top 7 or 8, and Cleveland was like top 2 or 3. So Asar, there's just a lot of stuff Asar does that they're really going to need in this series, because Cleveland shoots the 3 pretty well too. So assuming the Pistons can't, compete in that aspect, then it really just does become more of a possession game for them, which Asar is just so key to them winning.
Yeah, Pistons fan 11 says Asar on Harden and Cade on Mitchell an option or not. It's something I workshop, but I personally couldn't come up with what I liked about that as opposed to the opposite, I guess, is where I landed. So my other thing I tried to do was, can you, quote unquote, find someone you might be willing to hide Asar on and let him be a roamer, right? Like go, okay, maybe we're not going to be awesome at the point of attack against Mitchell and Harden, but if Asar is roaming off the ball, but I just don't know that Cleveland has those players that you feel comfortable with that. Like maybe you try to dare Evan Mobley to shoot the 3, but he shot the 3 really well in the first round. Sam Merrill shoots it. Maybe Dean Wade, but again, in the starting lineup, okay, we're going to play Asar off Dean Wade and let him be a helper, but you still end up with Duncan Robinson on one of Mitchell or Harden. So it is, I assume, at least to start the series, we see Duren on Allen, Harris on Mobley, Duncan on the 5th starter, Cade on Harden, and Asar on Mitchell, which leads back to Ron Holland. So we had multiple questions. Chuck says, I wonder if the matchups will allow Ron to get some run this series or not. Again, Salih says, hey guys from Bosnia, give some love here to Yusuf Nurkic. What do you think? Will JB give Holland a chance chance in the series against Cleveland. Also, I think the Pistons will play much better now since they're without pressure. It seems like it could be a Ron Holland series 0-2. What do you think?
It feels like a Ron Holland series. I think you just need a really good point of attack defender on the floor
Agreed.
at all times with some size. And like after Asar, I think Ron Holland's probably the next guy that I trust the most against a Harden or a Donovan Mitchell. And I would put, Javonte Green in that group too.
Sure.
But you've got to have, I think, some combination of Asar or Ron on the floor at all times just to give you that point of attack disruption. Like whoever the number one guy is, Asar can't play off 48 minutes, unfortunately. So even if it's just 10 minutes, like I think you've still probably got to work Ron Holland in there at some point. And if we don't see him in game 1, I can see them eventually turn into him in games 3 or 4 if they're realizing that they just don't have the perimeter defense that they need to slow them down.
And I do, to this same point, I wonder what it's going to look like for Danis Jenkins. I was actually a little nervous when I first started thinking about it because I'm like, I don't know that I love Danis on Donovan Mitchell or James Harden, but I do think I like Danis Jenkins on Dennis Schroeder. So I think that you don't have to match his minutes. Like you don't have to do it on purpose, but I do think it'll be good for him to get matched up with Schroeder. So yeah, let's talk about the center position. So Pistons fan 11 said he asked about Stu if he was hurt last time and did not play, but not very impactful like prior games. Stu's minutes didn't look great. Quite frankly, 0-2, Paul Reed's minutes didn't. Listen, game 6 will always be the Paul Reed game for me. I've said that. His minutes were not nearly the same in game 7. Jalen Duren came up with a huge game 7 performance. Huge. What was it, like 15 and 15 or 17 and whatever it was. Jalen Duren can't play all 48 minutes. And this is a front line with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley where you got to have good center play. I assume we see Stu get the first crack at it here, but what do you think this center rotation is going to look like? I'm a little nervous with Paul Reed in terms of the rebounding. Sometimes just the size can be an issue for him. And I do want to quickly point out, Jalen Duren in the regular season against the Cavs was the Pistons' leading scorer in those games. He averaged 22 and 12 in his 3 games played against the Cavs in the regular season.
And I also want to point out with Duren that his 2 highest free throw games of his career came back-to-back against the Cavs this year. I think he took 15 in one game and then 14 in the other and shot around 70-80% in both. So Duren gets to the line a lot against Cleveland, and like his presence is just different and distinct compared to Stu and P. Reed, where he just has a lot of force down low. He just commands a lot of space, and physically, I think he's stronger. Well, I mean, I don't think, like, he is stronger than Jarrett Allen and Mobley. So Duren actually can win a lot of those matchups. But he can't play out 48 minutes. You're still going to need, I think some high-level center play, but specifically you're going to need, some rim protection down there. You're going to need rebounding, and you're going to need some, strength. And this does, the way it could benefit Ron on the perimeter, I think it could also benefit Stu this series down low. I don't think they really went too big against Cleveland this season, and if they did, it wasn't much. But, Stu did play in all the games he was eligible for. I think he was suspended for the third one. But when Duren sits, it just feels like you're going to need his physicality and his know-how down low. I don't know if that's more than 8 minutes like he played in game 6 or 7, but he's going to factor in on some level.
Urim also said, shout out here, hi guys, who should play more, Reed or JD? Thank you. So kind of what we're talking about here, but wanted to give the shout out there. Also, I do think that this is, important things to point out as we talk the Harden and Mitchell matchups. As Chuck Brewer says, Harden and Mitchell can't play 48 minutes either. That is very fair. And they will stagger those guys. But it is the start of the game. It is the start of the third quarter. It is the end of the game whenever those guys will play together that Detroit has to really figure things out. And it's the same thing with the front line. As Laz says, Duren should eat when only one of Mobley or Allen is on the court. So it is those kind of matchup things throughout a game and all of that. And then we had one here. Yeah. G-Stu114 catching you live at work. Never a doubt. Hopefully your boss does not catch you listening, but we appreciate you tuning in very, very much. So thank you for that. Any other storylines coming out of the first round 0-2 or storylines going into the Eastern Conference semifinals that we haven't touched on right now? I was going to pull up my article. I dropped the Pistons versus Cavaliers playoff preview, trying to see if there was any stats that really stood out to me. Yeah, so here's one. While we're talking about defense, the Pistons defense forced over 14 turnovers in round one. The Cavaliers offense averaged over 17 turnovers against the Toronto Raptors. I wouldn't say Toronto and Detroit's defenses are the same. Toronto's a little bit more chaotic than what I think Detroit is even, but still teams that kind of thrive on forcing turnovers and pressuring. So maybe that's an area where Detroit can, have an advantage in this series.
Yeah, and they're going to have to find those advantages where they can get, because Cleveland, I mean, we talk about what they have down low. We talk about what they have at Mitchell and Harden, but they also shoot threes at a pretty high rate and knock them down at a pretty high rate as well, which makes me wonder how the Pistons will activate offensively, and maybe they can match Dennis Schenken's minutes with Dennis Schroeder, right? I think Pistons starting lineup will force Cleveland to play bigger, but once the substitutions start, you could probably find opportunities for Dennis where he's not going to have to match up maybe against their bigger guards as much. And, there's somebody else on Cleveland's bench too, but they've got some smaller guards that, I think could make this a bit more favorable for Danis.
Keon Ellis has been brought up in the chat. Keon Ellis ended up not being, I know he played early in the series, but that didn't stick. I'm under the assumption that we won't see a whole lot of Keon Ellis minutes. I could be wrong here. Obviously I don't follow Cleveland the way I follow Detroit, but he did not, he was a DNP for the final 3 games of the series and only played 4.5 minutes in game 4. He played 43 total minutes. The 2 big ones were game 1 and game 3. I don't think he's a great matchup for Cade Cunningham. So I would be a little bit surprised if we see Keon. Couple of Pistons rotation questions, O2. Pistons fan 11, any Kevin Huerter updates? Huerter was actually another player I thought about just because I think he's been surprisingly good at the point of attack. And when I say surprisingly, I didn't think he was going to be as bad defensively as maybe what some people thought, but he's been even better than I expected him to be. And I do think he's a guy that could come in and guard James Harden for a stretch of minutes whenever Cade's setting or whatever.
Yeah, this could be a sneaky Kevin Huerter series as well. He's still got that abductor strain and he's still questionable. So we could see him back for game 1 or just at some point this series, but absolutely a guy, who gives you some size, gives you some shot making. He had 5 assists, I think, in that last game before he got hurt. So toolsy enough to make an impact. And it gives you some size on defense as well, like you said.
So Pistons fan 11 also says, do we go back to the 11 guys or down to 8? And Laz says, LeVert, DMP, coach's decision in game 7. Is that going to stick? What do you think we see early in the series, Omari? Neither of us think there's any change coming to the starting lineup. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no changes to the starting lineup, I would think. I would guess maybe somewhere 9, 10 people rotation-wise, but I'm curious to see which way he goes. He played 11 in game 1 in the first round, and there's going to be a filling out process figuring out what works best against this iteration of the Cavs, which, again, they have not faced them with both Donovan Mitchell and James Harden. So it wouldn't surprise me if he went 11 deep, just try to mix and match and figure out what works. And then he shortens the rotation as the series goes. But if he only played 8 guys, then that would indicate to me that, he's just got rock solid faith in that group for whatever reason. I just don't see him having that type of faith in one lineup in game 1 when there's so much to figure out.
And a very different team, right? Like a very different. I mean, that's one thing about this is it truly you go from Orlando, who struggled to score and, was really locked in defensively. And I'm not saying Cleveland can't defend. Like they absolutely have the potential to be very good defensively, but even their best scorers are completely different positions and do it in a different way than what Orlando's did. Desmond Bane's a guard, but he did it in a different way than what Donovan Mitchell or James Harden do it. I think we see, if we have a fully healthy roster, I think we see a 11-man rotation. I think we see the starters and then all of Danis, Karras, Huerter, Holland, Green, and Stu. I could see Paul Reed maybe not getting in immediately depending on how Stu looks or whatever, but I could see an 11-man rotation. Maybe Karras just doesn't get it. But I'm going to go out and say I think we see Ron Holland in game 1, at least for a few minutes, right? And see what it looks like. He takes on one of those matchups. My worry is that, especially if he's on Harden, he gets in foul trouble or something like that. But I do think we see him. Steven says, who's guaranteed to come off the bench for the Pistons? In my opinion, if you told me he only played 8, it would be Danis, Green, and Stu. What would that answer be for you?
I would guess Danis, Green, and Stu as well. And if there's a knife, I could see Karras, but I could also absolutely see Ron Holland for the reasons we've talked about throughout the pod.
Yeah. So I think, if you told me that he only plays 8 guys in game 1, those would be the 8 guys I would say. I don't think that's what's going to happen, though. I do I think we're going to see Ron Holland get a chance. We'll see how it goes. And it may be game one and that's it. I also think we'll see Kevin Huerter if he's healthy. That's where I'm at. Maybe LeVert doesn't get, maybe it's a 10-man rotation. LeVert doesn't get his chance, but that's all we're going to do. Oh, Chad says, yeah, finally caught alive. Hopefully you were here for the whole thing because we're about to shut it down for today. So I feel very, very bad if you just caught us and then we're about to hit the end button. Yes, real quick. YouTube user says, I got my Game Theory notification. After you're done here, jump over, watch Bryce with Sam. We're going live on Game Theory here in about 15 minutes. I can't guarantee that Pistons will be the first conversation, but it will be one of the conversations during that episode, along with if you just want to hear us talk about the playoffs in general. But Detroit will absolutely be part of that conversation today. So hop on over there. O2, we're planning on going Friday, right? I mean, listen, guys, if there's a game winner Tuesday night and we feel the need to go on Wednesday, then obviously we'll adjust. But right now, I think our plan will be to let 2 games happen and then record. Let 2 more games happen and then record. If something crazy happens or whatever, again, we will adjust. In between episodes, make sure you are reading all of O2's work at the Detroit Free Press. Make sure you're subscribed to the Motor City Hoops Substack. MC313, yes, that is on YouTube as well. The Game Theory Podcast. You have to type in Game Theory Podcast because other stuff will show up. But so Chad is from Denver. We got all over the world today. O2, we got it all over the world. So appreciate the support. Make sure you go back and check out the top of it. I think that's it. I think we kind of covered it all. Got through it here, and yeah. We will talk to you guys on Friday. Check out all of our work as we cover games 1 and 2, and we'll be back then. Shout out all the great Pistons content creators out there. Special shout out to Laz, our guy Laz. Again, just the best. So, O2, take it away, my guy.
Yeah, like Bryce said, most likely we will be back Friday. So talk to you after game 2. And big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and big thanks to Wes Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you all soon.